A bear wandering through a mountain meadow in the springtime. The scene could be almost anywhere. North America, Asia, or Europe, perhaps. Just a few thousand feet below on the plains there are cheetah. Perhaps this is Africa. Where else would you find the world's fastest runner? The forest clearings hold plenty of wild boar. There are wild ass in this country too. They give some clue as to where this is. There are now few places where the rare wild ass exists at all. Only one country in the world holds such an extraordinary variety of wildlife. The country is Iran, or Persia as it was once called. The unique mixture of animals reflects Iran's geographical position. Set between Europe, Africa and the Far East, Iran has traditionally been a human crossroads. Alexander the Great conquered this mountainous country from the west. Genghis Khan swept across it from the north. But first and foremost, Iran is a crossroads of wildlife, so that now the animals here are a curious mixture. It's the range of terrains that allows such diversity. There's desert and open African-style plain between the mountains. Further north is rolling steppeland and deciduous forest that has much in common with northern Europe. But it's the mountains that dominate everything. Winter hits hard here, and the mountain wildlife is forced to migrate away from certain death in the snows. This is the story of the strange variety of wildlife's preparation for winter in Iran. A winter at the crossroads, if you like. Iran has always valued her wildlife. There was plenty of wild country for it to live in when this manuscript was painted 400 years ago. But since then, some of the wildlife has been seriously threatened, even destroyed. No one has seen the Persian lion, the national symbol, for a quarter of a century. The Caspian tiger is almost certainly extinct, and it might have been the same story for the cheetah and the wild ass. Tehran is the capital of this country, now enormously rich from its oil revenue. The city is hectic to say the least. In fact, Iran's population has more than doubled in the last 30 years. That and industrial expansion has put severe pressure on much of the country's natural habitat. With much foresight, a group of conservationists, and later the Department of the Environment, set up 68 carefully chosen national parks and reserves, so that the wildlife now looks more secure. The first national park was created in the mountainous region close to the Caspian, just south of the Russian border. It's named after the Shah of Iran. The Trans-Asiatic Highway snakes its way through the park. It's the only road in 500 square miles of protected habitat. Caspian forest reaches up the lower slopes, and above, the bare mountain peaks climb toward the skies. These seemingly inhospitable crags are a unique sanctuary for wildlife. Our year begins in June. At this time, these wild mountain goats, the ibex, make their home on the highest cliffs. The steeper the better, it seems, as far as they're concerned. They're wary and extremely agile. Ibex are literally born mountaineers. This youngster, just 2 months old, is quite at home. Billy ibex sport the traditional goat beard and scimitar horns. Later in the year, this headgear will be used to sort out mating rivalries. The rolling meadowland sheltered between the mountains is gentle country. Many of the plants are Himalayan species. That's no surprise. Summers are short here, curtailed by the bitter winter. With its thick coat, the brown bear is built for bitter winters. Bears spend most of their summer ambling through the high meadows in their pedestrian way, looking for roots and shoots, preparing for the lean months of winter ahead. At 500 pounds, this bear has an enormous frame to keep nourished, and the summer months must not be wasted. Bear country is unfortunately good country for grazing domestic sheep and goats. In Europe, much of bear habitat has literally been eaten away, and numbers have dwindled. But here in Iran, the brown bear is hanging on, now that in the parks at least, overgrazing is no longer a serious threat. Close by, a group of Urial sheep. Outside the breeding season, the older ram sheep lead separate lives from the females, forming themselves into bachelor flocks. Urial sheep don't look much like the domestic variety. They're better mountaineers for a start. Alarmed Urial sheep are almost as agile as ibex. Rather than climb away from danger like the ibex, Urials prefer to run, putting distance, and a dust storm in this case, between themselves and their enemy. Just 2 months old, the year's lambs have no difficulty keeping up with their mothers as they career down the steep hillsides. The Urial's main enemies on the mountain are the leopard, very occasionally a bear, and for those who stray onto the plains, the cheetah. Many people think that the cheetah is exclusively an African cat, and that might have been the case if the Iranian conservationists hadn't stepped in to save the last few Asiatic cheetah. Cheetah are in many ways over-specialized creatures. Less adaptable than leopards, they need flat spaces to make their kills. But they seem able to eke out an existence here on the uneven steppe country and in the mountain footholds, despite the winter blizzards, as long as they have enough to hunt. This is now assured, and in special reserves numbers are now increasing little by little. Way up on the hillside above, a black vulture keeps an eye on its one ungainly offspring. Black vultures use the same nest site from generation to generation. The parent vulture was probably brought up here too. Leaving its young, the vulture goes in search of death. Any kill is worth inspecting. A cheetah kill would be ideal. They're usually in the open, and nothing in the open escapes a vulture's sharp eyes. For 3 or 4 months, the parent vultures return to feed their offspring in the ancestral eyrie. For such creatures, the entire year's investment is lodged in just one youngster. They're often the hardest hit if winter comes early. Nearby, a more modest nest. The owner's an Orphean warbler. When the family's fledged, it'll migrate south to Africa. That way it'll escape the cruel mountain winter to come. For the moment, though, summer is at its height. Below one of last year's casualties, some sluggish tortoises making the most of the sunshine. But the blaze of color in the high pastures is a passing glory. Almost overnight, the short summer gives way to autumn. The hellebore flowers shrivel as the seeds are scattered by bitter winds, and the richness vanishes from the mountain pastures. Autumn means the rut for the larger animals. For a brief spell, groups of Urial sheep collect restlessly, often 100 or more together. October is the only time of year when the larger rams tolerate female company. They move around in small bands to try their luck with unescorted ewes. Ewes are only receptive for a very short period, and the intense activity of the rut ensures that most of them become pregnant. Ram sheep look for females in season and then round them up into temporary harems. Just who's in whose harem in the flock isn't always easy to tell. But if there's any dispute about it, the ram sheep with the largest headgear has priority. Until their horns reach full size and their body weight increases, young rams have no chance of their own harem. Only when two prime males are evenly matched is an argument sorted out by fighting, though it's largely a ritual. Shin kicking is often the prelude to a nasty thump. Very occasionally, someone does get hurt and has to withdraw from the contest. By now, the winter coats are fully grown. For the rams, they have a double function: to keep out the cold, of course, and as a display. The long white beard serves to impress both rivals and mates during the 2 weeks of rutting season. Ewes don't have manes, and their horns are thinner and shorter than a ram's. In the autumn rut, they can expect to be run relentlessly. In the meadows, there's one sound that is sure to interrupt anything. A leopard's cough must be one of the most blood-curdling sounds on the mountain. Iran holds the world's heaviest race of leopard. Individuals can weigh up to 100 kilos. Their fur is more sandy-colored than their African relatives. That's been evolved to blend in with the mountain surroundings. As a result, they're sometimes mistaken for snow leopards that live much further to the east. By and large, they're active at night, but occasionally they lie out in the sunshine. These ibex aren't in much danger of daylight attack, though in late autumn they forage further afield, away from their cliff sanctuaries. Their diet is mainly juniper leaves now. Tree climbing up narrow branches to get at them is an ibex speciality. With their perfect scimitar-shaped horns, these billy ibex are prime examples of their kind. Horns can be useful back scratches too. As autumn draws on, mist enshrouds everything. It rolls over the slopes, reducing visibility to almost zero. At this time of year, the wildlife often vanishes into nothing. For the ibex and the Uriel sheep, this may be the last time they can feed here before the elements force them downhill into the valleys. The change of weather forewarns that the snows are imminent as the winds veer towards the north. On brighter mornings, there's often a sea of low cloud over the valleys. Black-throated thrushes keep just one step ahead of the cold weather, moving on when their food is frozen up. Their arrival here from Russia means that the steplands there are already under snow. Juniper berries dislodged by the ibex provide a nourishing meal en route. Down below, the maples and hornbeams in the park are taking on the golden hues of autumn. Just 20 years ago, these forests were inhabited by man. Woodcutters, opium growers, and shepherds lived here. Once a glade was cleared, it was suitable for grazing. This way much of the forest was lost each year and the wild inhabitants forced out. Now the area has been set aside for wildlife only, the forest is beginning to return to its original state. These prehistoric-looking creatures are wild boar. They're some of the oldest inhabitants. Until now, the boar have been widely dispersed and difficult to see. But as the first snows powder the hills above, they hurry for the shelter of the forest. Once there might have been a tiger waiting for them. Now their main predator is the leopard. In the forest clearings, the light snow has melted in the morning sunlight. A Choctaw partridge chatters noisily. Its garrulous call helps it keep in touch with its neighbors. Choctaw are more at home on the open hillsides up above than in these clearings. But down here they're sheltered from the icy winds. The lonely winter has come to Asia. The high pastures are covered, so that the mountain wildlife will have to battle through the freezing drifts to clear ground below. Downhill migration is vital to avoid the twin blights of starvation and cold. The yearly trial of fitness has begun, for only in the shelter of the valleys is it possible to find a living. And that means all the grazers will have to compete for the same food in restricted havens. But the havens are far from safe. Predators can predict the animal's whereabouts, and so can man. The bird life is hard pressed by the snow too. A rock bunting casts about in the new landscape. Nearby, a group of Choctaw wake up to find their feeding covered. Magpies are one of the most hardy and adaptable birds. Wherever you find them, be it in North America, Europe or Asia, they're always canny creatures, wily and opportunist. In winter, the pickings are slim. Most of the magpie's usual diet isn't available, but the Uriel sheep provide a useful alternative supply of food. Magpies are the tick birds of Iran. For them, it's a welcome extra in winter. For the sheep, it means removal of parasites that might be the difference between life and death. After the rut, Uriel rams reach the limits of exhaustion. Running a harem against all comers for a fortnight is exacting work, and they feed very little during this time for fear they lose their females. An early fall of snow may prove fatal. The flocks take temporary refuge in a gully, reaching up to browse in the trees, more a goat habit than a sheep's. So the search continues for snow-free valleys. Here at last there's a more cheerful prospect of clear pastures. This ram is still running his harem, it seems. For one creature at least, winter doesn't mean eviction from his mountaintop home. On the warmer days, this Persian jerd, a sort of gerbil, ventures out from hibernation. Forays above ground must always be cautious. There are still a few predators about on the mountain. Foxes are the jerd's main enemy. Luckily, this fox is hunting slightly below on the frozen meadows. Though there's a chance of attack by an eagle, hunting during the daytime is a necessity during the winter. After an Arctic night at 30 below, morning finds the ibex making their way down from the drifts into the valleys. The snows have brought a new companionship, and herds are closely knit. The stocky billy ibex look magnificent in their winter coats. Black stripes on the shoulders are the mark of fully adult males. During their descent, the snow gets thinner. In true goat style, they nibble at anything that looks edible. For the youngsters, these forced marches are particularly tough. If they get separated from their mothers, they may find themselves abandoned. Fortunately, each kid can pick out its mother's bleat and keeps close to her. And so the migration goes on. People say that ibex can live up to 15,000 feet here in Iran, but in winter at least, the figure must be much lower. There's no food to be had in the drifts on the high mountain slopes. Rutting time for the ibex is right